hockey talk, but good. Well, welcome everybody. We'll get started here and others will join in, I'm sure, as we get going. Nice to be with you. Thank you for taking the time to be a part of our webinar today. My name is Joey Malloy, and I work with, of course, Implementa, and we're just thrilled to be able to have these webinars together. Let me get these slides going in the right position. There we go. That's why it's making more sense. So yeah, I'm Joey, and we have these once a month. Feel free to jump into your calendars and just book off noon Eastern time, the last Wednesday of every month, and there'll be a different webinar that we try to do. And we bring in guests that can help us learn and grow in our youth ministry skills, and today's no exception, to be sure. I want to thank Redeemer University for partnering with us on this webinar, and I'm going to show you a little bit of a video here to look at and consider when you consider Christian universities, both for yourself and also for your students. So let's take a quick look at this. There is Redeemer University. They are in Ancaster, Ontario. Great school to consider. And you're going to get an email from us later today or tomorrow with a link to the recording of the content of our webinar today, but as well a personal note from Redeemer. And so just keep them in mind as we continue to encourage our students towards what secondary education could look like for them. Okay, so today, Brett Ullman's with us, and I'm really happy to have Brett back. Brett, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Brett's title today is The Walking Wounded, Life is Good Until It's Not, and I'm interested to see and hear from Brett. Just as we're getting going, some webinar etiquette as reminders. If you could mute yourself, that would be great. Not you, Brett, but the others, you know, and that would be wonderful. And if please ask a lot of questions, but if you could just type those into the chat box, that would allow us to sort of get them sort of ordered. And once Brett's done, we'll have a Q&A time towards the end of our hour together. You'll notice in the chat box a lot of different websites and social media links that you can keep up with Brett on. He tells me his TikTok is going to be outstanding as he figures out how to work it and so on. But take advantage of that. Type your questions in the chat box. If at the end of all this, something didn't get answered that you really wanted to talk about, by all means, just email us at info@implementa.ca, and we'll either do our best to answer or pass you along to Brett if there's a question there. So Brett, thanks for coming. Really look forward to what you have to say and what God has to say through you today. I'll let you share your screen.
Awesome, thank you. It's good to be back. I can't remember when I was with you. I was trying to think, but it was during COVID, as that's kind of this abyss of most of our last few years. For those of you who don't know me, and I'm just getting this set up while I'm chatting, my name is Brett Ullman. I live in Ajax, so about 45 minutes east of Toronto. I was a teacher for a decade with the Toronto District School Board, and I left that, I think I'm 16 years ago now, I think. But my full-time job is traveling, a lot more Zooming over the past few years, but I speak on issues that I think we sometimes don't want to talk about or don't talk about. So one of my largest is mental health. Parenting is my second. And then I also speak on media, and I have a talk called Media, Faith, Culture, but I've been researching a new talk on media for the past year. And then I speak on dating, pornography, sexuality, and I have a new talk for men looking at how we as guys be better fathers, better husbands, and better boyfriends. I'm married with 2 kids. My wife's name is Dawn. My daughter Zoe's in her 2nd year at Western. She'll be transferring to McMaster in the fall. And my son Ben is in the other direction. He's at his 1st year at Queen's. So I'm in this weird season where I have 2 kids out of the house. Today, I'm going to walk through mental health. And I acknowledge that, I mean, a mix of maybe paid youth workers, volunteer youth workers, whatever it might be. Of all the talks that I do, though, this, some of you probably know my story. This has been a journey that I've been on now for 10 years. I left teaching. I did a program called the Arrow Leadership Program, went straight from Arrow into a master's degree of evangelism and leadership down at Wheaton, and then found myself speaking too much. And right after graduation, ended up having a breakdown. I mean, term nervous breakdown is not a medical term, but basically that's what it would have been. I spent a year of my life basically at home, not leaving my house for 5 months. This image, though, is just one of those images that's just perfect to me, because this is what I was offered from the leaders and friends and people around me. It was a million roads in a million directions. It was just chaos. Have you tried vitamin B12? Have you tried running? Have you tried Jesus? Those are all very different things. And that's what was offered to me on an ongoing basis. So my wife challenged me when I was at home, you know, what would you do if you ever spoke again? And I'm like, I'd like to have a different conversation on mental health. So this is kind of what I want to do today. We got about 40 minutes. And we're going to go through pretty quickly in this. What is mental health versus mental illness? What are the first steps you do? Like, I do agree we should make sure that we're doing well. Then we look at our loved ones. And of course, we're looking at our students, how our faith plays a role. I want to give a quick conversation on practical ways we can make our churches safe spaces. Now, safe space is usually a term you hear from an LGBTQ plus conversation. It's interesting to me, the new phenomenon I have, which is I have in the thousands of emails in the past 4 or 5 years from people who are, and this is, people debate this, but they say they're walking away from the church, but not Jesus. But people are writing me saying, I can't go to my church anymore. And the terminology I use is whack-a-mole. Remember, like those carnivals, the mole would step up and you grab the mallet and smash it down. They say, with my mental health struggles, every time I go to church, I feel like I'm being hit with a mallet. And so I want to walk through some of these unnecessary barriers that we can easily change, some practical help, and then we're done. And my links you can see in the chat, and we'll do questions and answers after, and you can also send me messages anytime. I used to end with this quote. I now begin with it. I just think it's a really important one. This is a book. Now, every book I promote today, if you go to the chat, you'll see my book suggestions. Just click the Canadian Amazon one. Stephen says, herein lies one of the most pervasive misunderstanding regarding mental illness. It's that God spares this kind of pain and suffering from those with deep and abiding faith. It's interesting how this is a conversation I hear. Like, what this means is that I'm unwell because I don't have deep and abiding faith. And that's just not true. It's one of the most damaging things I kind of hear as I travel today. What saddens me is the number of people who write me and say that the church has hurt them more than it's helped them. The church is supposed to be the hope of the world. And this is something that can be changed, but it means kind of putting our structures and our thoughts on mental health sometimes up and saying, okay, like Maya Angelou says, do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better. So first off, let's just get some terminology down. When I say I struggle with mental health, none of you thought, oh, I guess he has seasonal affective disorder. Like, you knew what I meant by that. But the terminology we kind of use interchangeably. But I just kind of acknowledge mental health is this. You know, it's defined by the World Health Organization, a state of well-being. You can realize potential, cope with normal stresses in life. And normal stresses in life is not COVID. Normal stresses in life for some people today is not the war in Ukraine and other things that are happening. I have friends in Poland who, you know, bringing kids and families into their houses. Like, that's not normal. People can work productively and fruitfully and can make a contribution to their community. Every one of you, every one of your students, every one of our parents, like, we all have mental health, just like we all have physical health. And it's really important to acknowledge that just because someone feels anxious doesn't mean they have an anxiety disorder. Normal anxiety is normal. Like if you were speaking today, some of you would have felt anxious all night and your heart would be beating right now. That's normal. Sometimes when you get up to the front in front of youth group, you feel a bit of anxiety, normal. And depression, I don't know if everyone's from Ontario, but like it's been cold this week and you kind of go from this beautiful weather and we all kind of feel a bit blah. Doesn't mean we have depression disorders or other things as well right now. So it's good to acknowledge what it is and is not. But if this is one axis, the other axis is mental illness. And this is diagnosed by a professional, not us, right? Unless you are trained like medical doctor or psychiatrist, right? You and I do not diagnose. And I would encourage us to make sure our kids are not diagnosing through TikTok, right? The new issue is like a 15-year-old girl diagnoses herself with bipolar because she watched a TikTok on bipolar, then begins to live life as a person with bipolar disorder, which they may or may not be. And so standard criteria for this, and you can put these both on an axis together. And I was at the conference, where was I? Iona Snare from out in BC mentioned this at a conference, and I like it. It's the idea of, even though I have high mental illness, I can still work at having good mental health. Just like I have a couple friends going through cancer diagnoses right now, and while they have poor physical health, you can still work at having good mental health. I kind of know in my life, I'm 10 years into this, I still struggle. I still have not slept through the night. I'm learning, like this is actually called an Aura ring. This monitors my daily sleep and other things that are going on. I wasn't planning on questions, but Colin, go ahead. Let's just do them while I see your thing.
I'm sorry, man. Can you just, is good and high the same thing?
Yeah.
And bad and low the same thing?
It's a good question. I would redo this. So high mental illness is bad. Good mental health is good, right? So the way that they word it sounds awkward. And I actually, it's funny, I was saying it and I'm thinking I got to read. This isn't from me. It's a mental health group in the UK, but high mental illness means like I have an anxiety disorder. High mental health would usually be a good thing. Now, however you word it is what we're meaning by that. Throughout COVID, I've heard a lot of people say this. Oh, one person said, oh, Brett, I can't believe schizophrenia and bipolar has grown so much during COVID. And I'm like, that's not the reality. They're taking mental illness and then talking about mental health. We've all had poor mental health. I mean, stats are around 80 to 90% of Canadians have worse mental health during COVID. Good question, though. One thing I hear a lot is people who, you've all seen someone post a tweet or a meme online about how mental illness, right? It's really simple answers. There are so many ways we come into struggling, and there's so many ways we come out of struggling. Everything that's a tick mark would be a conversation we could have on prevention. There's a book called Upstream by Dan Heath. If you haven't read it, probably the best book I've read in the last few years. Maybe before we have kids addicted to porn, relationships falling apart, bad mental health, how could we prevent some of those conversations? But here's just some, and this is just some. People have predisposition, traumatic events, burnout, breakdown, isolation, loneliness, chronic unwellness, which would be someone like me, substance use and abuse, social media. I mean, you've probably all seen The Social Dilemma. I don't like in The Social Dilemma how they're using fear to talk about fear, something I think they didn't really need to do. But I mean, every time I get a notification or my Apple Watch taps me, each time these things happen, I get a dopamine hit to my brain. And what does 500,000 dopamine hits do to a human? Like, we don't know. And our students, like your 15-year-old in grade 10 or whatever in your church is the petri dish. It's the test case. And we're seeing the highest statistics of anxiety and depression ever. Now, I don't put it all, like, this is not the issue, it is a issue. This is where nuance really matters. There's so many other things that have changed in society. That's actually my new research right now. If you are on my Facebook, you'll see I've been reading for the last year a lot of the books. But we put a lot of pressure on kids. I mean, I have watched my kids finish high school and head to university. Even in university, the pressures. My daughter wants to go into law, pressure. My son wants to go into psychology. Even to get into the program is pressure. Our diets are bad. We sleep less. Could be postpartum, could be concussions. And how you're parented is one of the biggest things I see today. When we overfunction, our kids underfunction. This is my parenting navigating everything talk, looking at how we create, families that are equipping for this progression. Like our kids, I mean, as youth workers, we know grade 12, they head off places. How do we equip those parents to prepare them? Because kids are heading to college, universities, and apprenticeships today, and they're not kind of ready for life. This is where we need to help equip them for life, not protect them from life. Those are very different things. I do believe that we have different sets of rules for mental health than we do other things. What I mean by this is if someone in your church has cancer, you know, there's protocols. If someone has diabetes, insulin, but with mental health, we give different rules. I'm not going to go through them all. Like the first comment, have you tried, not having the flu? These are conversations said to people with mental health struggles all the time. Like if I could have thought my way out of this, I would have already thought my way out of this. And the last one's a person giving themselves an insulin shot for diabetes. Like no one would ever say this to someone, with diabetes, but it is something we get told ongoing in the church world, again, for taking medications. So first, I say we start at a base where we can all move forward to healing. And I just say with medications, it's funny how no one cares about anything, meaning if you have asthma, take an inhaler. But we hit depression and anti-anxiety medications, and suddenly it's like, well, let me put it this way. I got diagnosed with Lyme disease about 3 years ago, and no one ever told me not to take medications for Lyme. But when I went on medications for, psychotropic medications, I have hundreds of messages of people who wrote me and said, here's the big one. You're not a Christ follower anymore if you take medications. Like, again, this is the well telling the unwell how to be. And I call this whack-a-mole. Like it's literally, you work hard to, say, I'd love some prayers, I'm going on meds, and someone takes a mallet and hits you over the head again. Now, I hope no one has to take medication. I do believe we too quickly over-medicate these days. But if you need medications, it's okay. It's okay to not be okay. And if someone does have to go on meds, I would encourage them to go to inagene.com. This is actually a study I used to do at the KMH in Toronto, but this actually will do a DNA test on you with saliva and cheek cells and tell you what meds to never try and what meds maybe you should try these. It's good science to add to something which is not a perfect science. So how do you know if someone's struggling? This is kind of a good thing for us as youth workers. Well, here's just a bunch of things. Changes in eating or sleeping patterns. Now, here's the truth with this one. Parents wrote me throughout COVID and said, oh, Brett, my teenager, like my 17-year-old's going to bed at 1 a.m. and waking up at noon hour. And I'm like, yeah, so are my kids. Like, it's literally a normal circadian rhythm for a teenager. So could it be an issue? Could, probably not. Social isolation, mood changes, not able to function. Yes, we know this is an issue. Apathy and loss of desire to do things, of course. Substance abuse. I call all of those self-harm, hurting yourselves in any way, shape, and form to get beyond overwhelming feelings, thoughts, and emotions. Porn use has grown, they think, 300%, and alcohol and drug use has grown in our church walls. I see this ongoing. Sudden drop in grades, and this is the biggest one. There are no signs. I can't look at you on Zoom and say, okay, first and third panel, you struggle. Like, that's not how it is. I struggle in here and I struggle in here. But this is where really good conversation matters. Have you ever said to someone, hey, how are you? And they're like, good. And I'm like, how are you really? And they're like, oh, let me tell you. Like, it takes this second time to ask. And it's where I think we have chances to have good conversation with our kids as well. And I do love the idea of checking in. I know a lot of youth groups who've done this online, like an emoji check-in. I like it. It was kind of made for younger kids, but even as adults, we can easily put an emoji of how we're feeling, and you can just Google this and find it. I know I'm blasting through this stuff really quickly. I do get it. This is recorded, so if you want to go back over it later, it's there for you. So what do you do if you're struggling? This is chaos. And not to go through a huge how I got here, but I like this. Body, mind, and soul. I'm currently half done my master's in counseling psychology to add psychotherapy to what I do. Even this is used. Now, soul is used a little different than we would, but your issue might be physical, so see a doctor. Your issue might be emotional. Go see a registered therapist. Again, registered, licensed therapist, not a buddy. I mean, the Bible might say give good counsel. That's not give good counseling. It might mean we hand off to someone else who we know And I would say be and people, not or people. It's not like a doctor or a therapist. Now, I say it might be physical, it might be emotional. Language really matters here. I do not say it might be spiritual. And hear me out. It is unbelievably uncommon that the answer to mental health and illness is in our faith. But our faith is the foundation from which we journey everything. So this is a nuance with this. It's not read your Bible more, you'll be better. This is things we tell people that are hurtful hermeneutics, but reading your Bible is phenomenal. Praying is phenomenal. But the answer is not found in there. God says you'll have trouble and suffering, but I'll be with you in that. So it's a bit of nuance of the foundation is our faith, and we look at those things that will help us. I finished speaking about 15 talks in COVID, and 5, maybe 10 pastors wrote me in the upcoming week and said, I know you gave all these reasons of how people struggle, but is the answer just not Jesus? And one person then said, or maybe demons. And I said, those are very different things. Like, you're talking very different. When people say this, I feel like the church packs up and moves away from the world we're called to be in. Isn't there kind of very practical answers for these? If your issue is traumatic events for the underlying ones, wouldn't trauma counseling be the answer? If your issue is you spend 10 hours a day on social media, maybe less. If the issue is over-parenting, maybe proper equipping for life. Now, this is all done through a biblical lens, a biblical worldview, and it's easy to say these things, but there's a lot of work for them. Now, I'm not going through these, but I would say in the body, there's a whole bunch of stuff, and the Bible is filled with physical analogies. But the big 3, I would say, is exercise, sleep, and diet. Have you ever heard the quote, food is often the culprit or the cure? Do you know how many teenagers come up to me and say they're anxious and they're shaking? And I'm like, how many coffees do you have today? And they're like, well, I probably have 4 iced coffees today. Like, simple answer, right? Sometimes people have right to faith and other things. It's like, let's look at the things that are controllable. Some of these things are natural consequences to your unsustainable life. Now, exercise is medicine, sleep is medicine, food is medicine, and medicine's medicine. There's a great quote that says, if you want to feel better tomorrow, sleep better tonight. So I encourage us and our kids to exercise, to get better sleeps, and to eat better. I'm not saying we can't have pizza nights. I'm just saying eat better. Someone once yelled out, how much better? If you haven't read the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, 5% better. 5% is a joke. We can all eat 5% better. While we're doing this, we learn some perspective. And this is what I'm looking forward to being able to journey with people, walking through the thoughts we have and some of the other struggles. And if you like the debate on psychology and science and God, Google Ed Stetzer. Ed Stetzer with a Z is at Lifeway Research, and he's actually on staff at Wheaton in Chicago as well, but good research on it. And not last, but the foundation is our faith. Our circumstances will never alter the character of God. God is God and we are not. Again, I'm not saying these things fix you, but they build your faith, and right, you can have good faith and walk through this no matter what's happening. When I'm in a public environment, I just booked a CrossFit studio yesterday, like interested, and I've done a few other real estate agencies. I actually use this slide. And these things are good for us as Christians. Well-being, purpose, volunteering. Tomorrow night, my wife and I will go to a place in Oshawa called The Refuge, and we will give dinner to homeless, students, what's the new term, experiencing homelessness. Like, volunteering is good, gratitude jars. Mindfulness is just breathing. It's interesting how much pushback I get when I'm like, it's just breathing. Apps like Headspace and Calm. This is not faith. This is not solitude and silence. This is not meditating on Jesus. This is if you're anxious right now, you'll be breathing with your upper chest and not your belly. Belly breathing will help calm you down. These are apps that just, if you breathe calmly in the moment, but even a couple times a day, it will bring your anxiety down. Faith, I mean, there's so much we could do here. I just say, do we trust God is who he says he is? And this means that if I never get better, and I'm not speaking this over myself, but I don't think I'll ever be better. I've been unwell for 10 years. I haven't slept through the night for 365 times 10. And so I'm okay, but I'm not better. But if I never get better, God is still God. And if I get better, God is still God. Sometimes we have this idea that, if it's good, it's God. If it's bad, I mean, we live in a fallen world, which kind of brings me to this slide, which is a really good book by Richard Winter. He says there's 5 reasons we suffer. And I just love this. Number 1, Genesis 3. We're caught up in a fallen world and we're deeply affected by it. Number 2, we live with the effects of others' sins. One of my best friends was a guy named Warren Parker. He was killed by a drunk driver about 18 years ago. We've lived with that forever. Our own sinful nature. I worked too hard for too long. Now, I always say I wish I could go back and change it. I still think I would have probably struggled, no matter if I was still teaching or other things. Those are the big ones. 4 and 5, he writes, but he takes this in different places. I mean, there is a spiritual realm, depending on denominationally. Some people never spoke. I grew up Fellowship Baptist. I never had a single sermon my entire life on it. And then I married a Pentecostal, where more often than not, we talk about it. Not supposed to, Baptists don't marry Pentecostals. It did happen for us. But the reality is this, it's in the Bible, and we need to have a thought on this. And there's a good book by Neil Anderson. I said Neil Armstrong the other week. Very different. One went on the moon, the other one. Anyway, it's just a good practical book. In God's discipline and discipleship, there are verses throughout the Bible. God tests his people and his prophets to know what's in their hearts. I do not say that God doesn't cause our cancer or cause our struggles, but I like this structure. A couple slides I want to go through of things that people said to me, just things I'm going to encourage us never to say again. And then the next slide is things that we should say. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but everything happens for a reason is the biggest thing I hear. I don't believe this is true or biblical. I believe this is actually determinism, which is actually more Islamic. But just think through this. Even if you believe in this, how does this work? I sit down and, Joey's struggling. He's like, Brett, what's going on? I'm like, everything happens for a reason. And Joey's like, what reason? And I'm like, I have no idea. And then I leave. That's not helpful, right? Again, it's the well telling me unwell. Let's go down to, how about God won't give you more than you can handle? This is not actually in the Bible. God won't tempt you more than you can handle, but God won't give you more than you can handle. 2 Corinthians 1, Paul and his companions, what do they say? We were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself. Basically, I have way more than I can handle. And we lean back on our God. Is there sin in your life? And I'm always like, yeah, lots. And then they don't know what to say, because you get that vein of thinking. And the last one is, well, at least. Someone said to me a few weeks ago, well, at least you don't have cancer. And it's like, and then I've had before, at least you're not dead. And it's like, this is not like whack-a-mole. Here's things you can say. How are you today? Because the word today changes things. Say, I'm praying for you, and then actually do it. The next 2 mean you're actually in front of me saying something. This is where I think we need to make sure we address things. And this kind of goes to on the right side, ask how is your struggle going? Sometimes one of our kids loses a parent, or their parents get divorced, or there's a death in your youth group or other things, and we never speak about it again. I'm at a church in Alberta. Children's pastor comes up, and I think it's children's or worship, and children's pastor, youth pastor is beside me. And I said, hey, to the woman, how's your breast cancer? She bursts out crying. And the youth pastor kind of punches him in the arm and says, you can't ask her about her breast cancer. And she turns to him and says, he's the only person who's asked me in 2 years how I'm doing. Like this, when we talk about deconstruction, that's not okay. How dare we claim Christian faith and we sing all these songs and we preach all these sermons about community and everything else, and no one's asked you how you are in 2 years? It's okay to address things. It's okay to do that. 2 Corinthians 1-3, who comforts us in all our troubles, so that we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we ourselves receive from God. And by the way, someone's going to ask, what do you mean by shawarma and Big Mac? I just mean food. There's something about food. Darkest day of my life, somebody brought me a shawarma, my favorite thing in the world. And it was one of those things, I remember sitting back on the ground where I was sitting and going, there's something about food. It's what I miss most from my Baptist roots, potluck Wednesdays. Potluck Wednesday, like why? Because you'd sit together and you'd eat a meal together. It's kind of what I'm loving coming out of COVID, having people over again and doing this. So I wanted to get through this quickly because I wanted to go through something I've been doing for leaders, youth workers. Now, I fully acknowledge some of you will be paid, some of you are volunteer, but I think there needs to be a partnership and a procedural kind of mental health thought for the entire church. Often, though, I find it's led by youth workers and other people. So the question of, is your church a safe place for people who struggle with mental health and illness, is an interesting question. So here are 4 things I think we should do. Number 1 is talk about it from the pulpit. My favorite, I do this for youth groups, but my favorite thing is to do this for a Sunday morning church service. I was in Bolton the other week and did it. This is my favorite. Why? Because you get everyone and you can have a conversation and address it. Too often the silence is deafening. Have you ever heard that quote? Like when I finish speaking and a 50-year-old, someone my age, comes up and says, Brett, I've never heard an entire sermon in my life on mental health. How? How are we not connecting Sunday with Monday? How are we not connecting, right, what we say with the rest of the week and what we do? And so even in your youth ministries, you have 52 weeks in a year, take a few off for Christmas and a few other occasions, but this should be addressed. And this is where we equip and empower our kids and our parents from the youth ministry for this. Number 2 would be get yourself some education. Even as someone who's spoken on mental health for 23 years, I'm enjoying being in school. I'm enjoying the readings and learning. But where do you start? I got 3 options here, but Living Works, some of you might know, they do have a new one called Living Works Faith. It's actually a faith conversation, but as you can see here, they have this chart with all these different things you can do, but a single training that you could offer for your leaders and maybe even offer, right, talk with your senior leadership and see if this is something you could do for everyone. Mental health first aid. I know some of the Bible colleges offer this, but this is a great thing, as well as Sanctuary Mental Health has some kind of video series that you can do as well. Now, here are the most simplistic things that you can do that I call unnecessary barriers. And it has to do with just the way we do church and different things. So the first one says ropes. I'm speaking on mental health at a church out west. And as I'm sitting chatting, like I'm there about 45 minutes early, and the pastor says to me, so we roped off everything, so all the people will be down near the front. Is that okay with you? And I said to him, are you asking me? Like, if I say no, he said, oh, we would take them down. And I said, could you take them down? As I'm saying this, a woman's passing, putting her coat on, not off. And she stopped and said, oh, I'm sorry, did I hear the ropes are coming down? And I look at the pastor, he looks at me and I'm like, please? And he goes, yeah, we are. And she said, okay, I'm going to stay then. And the pastor said, like, I've known you for a long time. What is happening right now? And she said, I have severe anxiety. I'm only here tonight because I want to hear about this mental health stuff. I sit in that corner. It's where I feel comfortable. It's roped off right now. I would not be sitting at the front. So she said I was leaving. And the pastor almost cried. He said to me, like, I did not, like, what an unnecessary barrier. Often when I've done youth groups, some youth groups have like even like upstairs seating. I'm like, I don't care where people sit. I'm glad you're here, right? That's the biggest thing. Checking language. This is one thing that when I do speak, I quickly talk to the musical worship leaders, because what's the first thing every worship leader says as we begin? Everyone rise. My buddy Mike Ross is the PA announcer for the Leafs. Sorry, Joey, but he's the Leaf announcer. What's the first thing he says? Rise if you can. Why on earth can, like, hockey do this, but in the church? So here's what I mean by this. My issue with anxiety is dizziness. And so I go to a church called Sanctus. We're kind of stadium seating. And so if I stand, I'm on an angle, I feel dizzy. So I'm now holding on to the pew in front of me. And my goal is to survive 35 minutes of music. Why not? Like, don't I get to take part? Like, all it would mean is rise if you can. Even the language. Did you have a good week? Like, many people, the answer is no. How about we're glad you're here, whether you had a good week or a bad week. And how about how loud is the music? Now, I come from a church with loud music, some of you do, but do we offer something for people who this is triggering for people, including me, loud music? I'm at a church in Alberta, I think it was. And at the beginning of the service, the pastor says, so we're going to do worship. We know it's loud. He kind of laughed at it, but he said, if any of you don't like that, go outside. I forget, he said, like, there's a bunch of couches and there's TV and there's the music is less. But here's what he said afterwards. He said, when we're done, I start preaching, just come back in. He said, you're not disturbing me. I got a little teary. I'm like, there's permission to go out and permission to come back in. And so these are just simple things, right? These are the most simplistic ways that we might not realize that there are barriers for people. A friend of mine, Andrea Foster, she travels a lot in the POC church world, but she has 2 kids with a lot of disabilities. And she talks about, what's her thing? Everybody fits. Like, is there a space for people with Tourette's and other issues in our churches? I'm like, really good stuff. And the last one here would just be resource your congregation. Again, I know we're youth workers, but how could we do this? I'm at a church in, I think it's British Columbia. I set up my table, big church, and I went in to speak and I came out the other door. And as I came out, there's this, when I say a table, it's not like a fold-up table with a cloth on it. It had like a wooden thing, looked like a cabin on it. And I looked, and all it said is something like, we care. And I look at the table. It's a map of the city with pins to everything that the church offered and everything that local churches offered. From Alcoholics Anonymous and divorce care and like just, and then there was the book of the month, which was a book on mental health, and the church was selling them. It was, and then there's the counselors that they deal with, and that church I think did freedom sessions, but it was just saying, here's what we offer, here's what our city offers. And I'm like, this church, what are you saying by putting that up? You're saying, we love you, we care about you, we know you're here. How do we serve you as the church? I was so overwhelmed by it. And so I like the idea of a book or resource table. And I mentioned this earlier, do the best you can until you know better. And when you know better, do better. Please don't take anything I say today about shame and condemnation. I mean, vast majorities of us have never, right, taken courses on mental health or anything. But if we're like, I can do that, like that's where we begin to move forward and get better. Some resources, and then we'll be done. We'll do some Q&A. The Canadian government has a really good website. They now actually own wellnesstogether.ca. It is a mix of surveys. There's some group stuff they do. It's really well done. My website is just my name. It's in the chat. I don't think it's actually linking, but it's just brettallman.com. Now, I am not a normal blogger. I am a curator, which means I'm a collector. So I read a lot. I probably read 2 books a week. I love reading. It's also part of my job, so I have a bit more time. But when I find good articles or good things, I just like, here's a great book or here's a great TED Talk or other things. So if you clicked blog, everything's categorized. And you can find the last 7 years of resources. I think it was Michael Hyde who called it a landing place where you can find everything. And across the top are all my social media. I actually don't think I have TikTok on this one. I got to update it. But here's what I say. I have a 9-part video series on how to have a better relationship with your phone, which is it's a good thing for youth groups. But I encourage us with technology. When you hear of an author, a preacher, a speaker, a thought leader, or someone who speaks on a topic, go to their website. Like, let's say Dan Siegel is a great parenting person. I go to their website and everyone is the same, like LinkedIn, Twitter, and I go like, follow, and everything. Because when I'm done with you today and I have a few minutes, if I'm on social media, I don't just want, I always say dinner and dogs, and I do have an English bulldog, so I do like English bulldog pictures, but I want my social media filled with good content on how to be a better Christian, right? Faith stuff, spiritual disciplines, and how to talk, work. For me, I have 2 adult kids now. How do I be a parent to my adult kids? How do I research conversations like mental health? I have 20 videos on how to have a good kind of mental health during COVID. They're all on YouTube as well. They're short, but they're quick conversations. And I have a whole bunch, I think I have 120 or 30 videos. The 10 ways to make your church a safe space is what I said today, but I've narrowed it down to 4. I think it was a bit better. But all kinds of stuff on this. And I have a video before you take meds and a video after, if you have to be on medication. And I'm actually a big fan of books on habits and change. I've mentioned my two favorite, Upstream and Atomic Habits. We know we need to, from a spiritual side, read our Bibles, pray more, right? These things. We also know we need to exercise more and all these other things. But for whatever reason, we're not creating the structures and how to do it. So some of these books to me are quite good. I have had professionally filmed videos of everything that I do, and you can find them all on YouTube. The older version of Walking Wounded, this talk changes over time. So there's no COVID and stuff in it. And every book that I find that I like in every category, you can find on that Amazon link that's in the chat. Some people actually are big readers, and I would give you 4 options. Mental Health in the Church is for us as church leaders. The Anxiety and Phobia Workbook is a beast. Ooh, it's a big beast of a book. You can see from, this is one that I use, chapter on nutrition, chapter on sleep issues, chapter on taking medications. And my other favorite book is The Ripple Effect. Actually, I have them here. I might as well show you. The Ripple Effect. It's on the screen too. Sleep better, eat better, move better, think better. This is kind of foundations of life, and I think it's really important. I've written 5 books. My 2 media ones are getting a bit older. I acknowledge that. Still some good content. Your Story, The Wounding Embrace, I wrote with Dr. Mary Lynn, who's a psychologist, and Adam Clark, who's at People's in Toronto. This was written before my breakdown, so it's good information, but it's more like, here's what depression is, here's what self-harm is. And Reset is a free ebook. It's $1 on Amazon, but if you sign up for my email list on my website, you're welcome to cancel it right after, but it will send you a free copy of this. It's the journals of my breakdown put in book form, which sounds weird, but someone said to me once, Brett, I've never heard a Christian's perspective on a breakdown. And so I wrote my journey. Carey Nieuwhof, some of you know, Carey wrote his journey. And then I think it's 16 other people who wrote theirs. And through COVID, I completed a 3-year journey to create a single resource for parents. I think the older I get, the more I realize how important it is. I mean, you've all seen the orange curriculum of how many hours we get a week as youth workers and how many hours parents get. So this is not a normal book. It's 6 times bigger. It is literally a handbook on this. Like, I mean, my Parenting Navigating Everything talk is the first 6 chapters. There's a family discipleship chapter. And then it's every topic we need to address. Mental health, which I have the arrow for, media, sex, porn, dating, finances, substance abuse, and loneliness. Side note, 47% of teenagers in the last study I read say that they're now lonely. Like, this is a huge shift that's changed during COVID. I'm 50, my generation, it's across the board with men and a little less for women. But you can get this on Amazon from me or anywhere else. And my wife and I have just finished a study guide for this. So it's a 16 chapter, it's questions on every chapter as well. And if your church has Right Now Media, you can actually on Right Now find my video series on this. It's a course you can get online. All right, 2 slides and we're done. Great courage with great care. This is something my counselor told me, and I really like this, right? It's the idea of, and this is what I like, even working with our students, right? Some of our kids have a lot of anxieties and different things. Great courage, go to school, go work at Starbucks, McDonald's, go to church, do the things that we need to do. And then the question is great care. What is that? Do our kids know what fills them up, right? What are those things that recharge them? We seem to be living kind of this half empty all the time. How do we charge ourselves up? And social media doesn't do it, right? It's this idea of community that helps a lot of us, and exercise and being in nature, and the list goes on. I love Body, Mind, and Soul. I think it is an interesting, easy way to begin to look at moving forward, because we can all do it. We can all encourage our kids with exercise, with sleep, with diet, right? With counseling. And I would say have counseling, like, let's normalize counseling, right? Like, my kids have always known that they can go talk to a counselor anytime that they want. And so normalize it. And I always say to parents, we need at least 5 kids speaking truth into our kids' lives. So you are one of them as youth workers, us as parents, but how do we gain the other ones? Teachers, coaches, other adults, family. I unloaded a lot in that. I wanted to make sure I got a little thing in on making your church a safe space. let's do some Q&A. And as a side note, again, if you want to write me afterwards, you're more than welcome to, but or maybe Joey has some stuff first before Q&A. So we'll go back to Joey and then we'll come back in a second. You're muted, by the way, Joey. If anyone does have any questions, you can drop them in the chat too.
There we go. Sorry, guys. Very good. Brett, thank you very much. Lots of content. We do have some questions in there. Feel free to type them in just as I'm sharing a little bit here. I'm going to just share a couple little things and we're going to go straight to some Q&A. So hang in there. Thank you, Brett. Take advantage of all the incredible resources that have just been piling up over the years as he's been doing some awesome research and all that kind of stuff. And Brett, thank you for being vulnerable with including your own journey in some of the knowledge and so forth that we need moving forward. I really appreciate that about you, not just today, in lots of our conversations over the last few years. Thanks again to Redeemer University. Look for that email that's going to be coming your way later today or tomorrow. We appreciate them, and it's an awesome Christian university and environment for your students. My friend Mike Gordon and I have been cruising around Ontario doing this little thing called Answered Prayer. If you're in the Ottawa area, we're going to be in Canada on Thursday night, tomorrow night. We're going to be in Kemptville on Sunday evening. And then on April 10th, we're going to be in Kingston. So if that's something, it's about bringing together youth groups and youth workers, celebrating unity, the answered prayer of Jesus, our great high priest, when he prays for unity for us as the church. So, and it's just a great chance to get together and see people. We were up in North Bay a few days ago, and it was awesome just to be with people together. Implementa, we try to do a few different things, but the main thing that we do is our online courses and our on-site intensives that make up our youth ministry program. It's all about taking youth ministry principles right into the trenches with where you're at. So if you've been in youth ministry for a long time, or if you just started out, consider taking a course with us and growing in that. Again, any questions, info@implementa.ca. Couple of things to highlight this summer. There's a one-day intensive in July on calendaring and just how to put together a ministry calendar. And I guarantee that if you come, you will have your ministry calendar for 22-23 done when you leave that day. If you want to bring your youth group out and get ready for September, which is coming eventually, and get your team ready, we have a prep retreat that we run at Camp Carith here in the Ottawa area. Pray, relate, equip, plan. More on that, of course, on the website. And then in August, on the 20th, we'll be doing another intensive called Preaching and Teaching to Students. And again, there you'll learn not so much the hermeneutics of it, but more the presentation and putting together a sermon series and those types of things. So take advantage of those. We'd love to have you check some of those out and let us know. Next month, my friend Matt's going to be back from Truth Snack, and he's been over in Scotland working so hard, getting so much together. Jump onto his YouTube channel and see what he's up to, and then come on out next month, the 27th of April. And like I said earlier, just go ahead and put that repeater on every last Wednesday of the month to remind yourself, don't make any other meetings. You're going to be with us for our Wednesday webinar extravaganza.